This is the City Breakfast Show, the city's biggest conversation.
Well, it's a few minutes, actually 9:13. This is 97.3 City FM. Welcome to EdTech Monday. It's brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation. And today we're discussing how to address quality education gaps using technology. So we have essentially three basic questions. Number one, what do we mean by quality education? Number two, what are the gaps in attaining quality education? And number three, how can technology bridge these gaps? We have three very interesting people. We have Evelyn Ajepong, an education consultant and chief inquiry officer at Steambox GH. Evelyn, good morning. Welcome to EdTech Monday.
Good morning, Ben.
Great to have you. We also have Abel Akwe, an education enthusiast and executive director of Africa Schools Online. Abel, great to have you. Good morning. Abel, are you there? Good morning.
Can you hear me? Good morning, Bernard, and thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And we have Genevieve Simiyu, country manager of Chalkboard, an education and EdTech company using technology to help people access content everywhere. Genevieve, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Ben.
Fantastic. Well, don't forget the EdTech Monday is brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation. I'll tell you more about the Mastercard Foundation as the program proceeds. So, guys, I have three essential basic themes. So first, I want to look at your definition of quality education, so we are on the same page. Then we'll talk about the issue of what gaps exist in achieving same, and then we'll jump into the main issue of what technology can do. So let me start with Abel. Abel, tell me what you think quality education is and how you think we should operationalize it.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I think quality, when we're talking about quality education, we are looking at three major things, right? The first is improvement of inclusivity of education access and also create an all-inclusive education, right? So improving access. The second would be to improve the learning and teaching experience, which will catapult into improving the learning outcomes, right? So the second is outcomes. And the third is creating systems that create accountability of the outcomes that have, been achieved. So it's basically these three things. And maybe the SDG 4 explains it quite well. It says, improve equity, access to education, and also promoting lifelong, educational experiences. So that, in my view, would be what quality education is.
All right. Thank you for that. Evelyn, what else can you say in terms of the key components of quality education? And would you say that we have all these elements present in our educational system as we speak?
Okay, so I'm glad Abel went that way. I'm coming from the point of view of having been in a classroom for a very long time. So for me, quality education is understanding phenomena around us and the world around us, being able to explain what is happening. Also having healthy learners. And when I talk about healthy learning, I'm talking about social, emotional, physical, cognitive, mentally, and are ready and enthused to learn, actually ready to learn. And also not always thinking about formal education. Education happens everywhere. So as well as having the school-based learning, there's also learning outside of your formal setting. So for me, that's part of what I'll define quality education to be. Your second question talks about, do we have to do every aspect in Ghana? And my answer simply to that would be no. Not all aspects are actually present in our current education system. Part of it is we are very knowledge-based here. Ghanaian education tends to be more so about remembering facts, learning facts, and so on. We're now kind of beginning to understand that education also requires application of what you've learned to new and various circumstances, and also really data-based, data-driven learning. When I talk about data, I'm talking about knowing the children that you have in your classroom, and also knowing what the current research is saying about the way we learn, because that is continuously also changing. The more research there is out there, the more knowledge we have, and therefore the more we need to change the way in which we actually educate our children. And I'll put educate in inverted commas there. Thank you, Ben.
I can hear some kids in the background, so you are always teaching. So thank you for
Indeed.
speaking to us, even though there are lots of kids crying for your attention in the background. I'm sure you're in a school environment as we talk.
I am in a school environment. Yeah.
Amazing. Keep it up. Let me talk to Genevieve. Genevieve, thanks for joining us. This is my second time of having you, if I'm not mistaken, on this platform. Do you agree with the gaps they've identified? And what do you think accounts for these gaps?
I agree 100% with what Abel and Evelyn have identified before me. We have a lot of different gaps, especially when it comes to I look at it from three different perspectives. So we need to look at the environment where our students are coming from and where they're going to learn. So is the environment conducive? Do we have enough facilities for them? Are they able to access a teacher, or are they just in a classroom with no access to the teacher? So that's one of the reasons that causes the gaps. Another reason is the content or the material that is being taught. This really affects the kind of people who come out of the school system. Like Evelyn and myself, I haven't been back in school in a long time, but we can see that the process hasn't changed much from since we were there. They're still teaching rote learning, so we're still very good at passing exams. We're still very good at memorizing. But when it comes to critical thinking or skills that we need to develop for our future, like the show you had just before we came on, the segmentation of what Ghana is going to look like in 40 years, we're not ready. So I believe that we need to look at content, and we also need to look at the environment that people are coming from, and eventually the outputs, what we're coming out of school to do, and how we've created what we're going to do with the environment around us.
Brilliant. I'll come back to you more on this. I just want to mention that this is EdTech Mondays, brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation. Now, the Mastercard Foundation does many things. In Africa, we're working with young people to give them better future. In Canada, of course, they also help Indigenous Canadians access dignified and fulfilling work. Now, the foundation was created by Mastercard in 2006 as an independent organization with its own board of directors and management. Now, in Ghana, after more than a decade working with the private sector and government to promote financial inclusion and education through the Scholars Program, the foundation launched the Young Africa Works, which is a 10-year strategy to enable 3 million young Ghanaians to find work, particularly young women. And one of the things the Young Africa Works tries to do is also to scale up digital training and strengthen technology-focused employment. And EdTech Monday, which we are part of now, is one of the initiatives of the Foundation's Regional Center for Teaching and Learning in ICT. Now, if you're watching on YouTube or any of the social media platforms, feel free to send your comments or questions. We will read them to our guests, 3 of them this morning, who are answering 3 key questions. What are the gaps in the educational sector? How do we address these gaps, and what can technology do? So let me come back to Abel. You gave us a working definition of quality education. You've heard your colleagues talk about some of the gaps we have in education. How do we address these gaps, Abel? Where do we start from, and who needs to be involved in the process?
That's a very difficult question, because what I've, through my experience, gathered is that it's unless we really segment and try to find the critical areas and the things that we can deal with as a country, we cannot, because it's really vast. As Evelyn mentioned, education is everywhere, right? So, for instance, environmental, as Genevieve mentioned, what can we do to improve the infrastructure that we have so that the kids are going to school and they are comfortable with the teaching and learning experience? What measures can we put in place? And this government, to some extent, is doing quite well. We know of the securitization of the GET Fund and how it got us some extra money to do, some building facilities, but it's not enough. We need everyone on board, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the public sector, to come on board to help us address these gaps. Content is really key, and it was really made evident in Corona times, where we realized that people in the private schools were able to deliver content online to the kids, whereas those in the public schools did not at all, right? Yes, there were some interventions made where people could watch TV, or even CTTV had this program where people could watch, teachers teaching, but it wasn't enough. So I feel it's very important that when we are talking about these interventions, there's a clear-cut policy and strategy that comes with it, so that we are able to implement and execute these strategies to the core. What we are seeing in our current dispensation is there are, pockets of strategies and quasi implementation that is not really going to, the bottom root of the problem. So it keeps resurfacing here in and here out.
Very interesting. Evelyn, what policy measures do you think are in place to address these gaps? And why do you think they're not being fully implemented?
Um, Again, you see, that's a heavy duty question you just asked me. So now I've got to think of the best way to approach it. When I found I was going to be on this show, I actually did a bit more research. Most of my education experience was in London, UK. I came to Ghana in 2017. And the reality is, I felt I'd stepped back probably about 25 years, about the length of my teaching career, as to what was happening in Ghana. Mainly, there were pockets of amazing things happening, by the way, but what was happening in the mainstream and where we need to get to. So there's got to be some leapfrogging. We have the most amazingly, beautifully written policies in Ghana. You look in the system, they have consultants who are clearly able, clearly knowledgeable, who have written beautiful policy documents. As far back as 2003, the first education strategic plan was put out. Then we had ICT for Accelerated Development, 2003. Then we had ICT in Education, 2008. And all of them still identifying the same key problems: the infrastructural stuff, the implementation, the way in which we disseminate, the way in which we are educating our real change makers, who are the teachers. It's no good writing a beautiful policy in isolation and then expecting it to filter down through the many layers. I mean, personally, I think there's too many layers in our system, from the top down to the teacher in the classroom. And so there are amazing policies out there. The main one currently in existence is the Education Strategic Plan 2018 to 2030, which looks mainly as SDG 4, which is the Sustainable Quality Education for All from the UN. And you can see that they have identified, and this is what I'm talking about, the data-driven, research-driven way in which we can move things forward. 263 million children worldwide do not have access to education. That's about 9% of any youth population. Rising up to environments like ours, which are still developing, to about 20% of children not having access to education. And the policy identifies, is talking about equipping Ghanaians with relevant education and skills to promote scholastic and social economic development with a national orientation to developers. Like I said, it's beautifully written. How do we translate that to the child who's actually going through the system in order that they can come out and be a real stand upright member of society? So the policies are there. Sometimes very difficult to find, I'll be honest with you. They are not made very clear. I searched and searched. In fact, I use most of my network to get a lot of the information I required for today. It's not really available. They are there, but they're hidden. You need to look for the right bit and press the. It's not easy to find. And I'm somebody who say I'm relatively digitally literate, and I struggled to find that information. But there are beautiful documents out there. Then add to the fact that the education strategic plan is 154 pages long. Now, exactly, Evelyn being Evelyn, I like that kind of stuff. So I read it all in the past week. But I'm imagining a teacher who's got a classroom of children to teach, or a school of children to teach. Am I that interested in a 154-page document to tell me how I do the right thing for my children? No. So how are we sharing that information with them? And there is the challenge. So it's a communication first, the enthusing first, before we get to the point where these amazing policies translate to what we see at the chalk face. So I'm borrowing Genevieve's business name there, the chalk face, chalkboard point. So that's probably where we are now with policy.
Let me come to Genevieve. So we are told that there are at least 4 components of education, right? So there's the physical, you need a classroom or a space. Then there's a cognitive, which is really understanding what is taught, learning, and all of that. Then, but I'm also told there's also the emotional and then the social dimensions of education. So taking this premise, where do you see the biggest challenge and how do we bridge these gaps? Genevieve.
Oh, Ben, this question is, you can't choose a favorite from this and decide which one is more important to address. They're very important. They go hand in hand. You can't isolate one and deal with it on its own. You need to actually work on all four at the same time, or at least systematically, to make sure you're bringing the right amount of change. So, for instance, this is a question you had asked at the beginning of this conversation, and you're like, where are we now? Where do you want to be in 40 years from now, let's say? And what are we going to do to get there? So I'll choose two for now, although I believe all four are very, very important. I'm going to go for two. So I'd say cognitive. It's very important that we actually focus on how we're teaching the students, what they're learning, how they're learning it also, because we have a very wide range of learners. People are focusing on one type of learner. Meanwhile, we have a very diverse audience. Very many people learn differently. So we need to be able to teach in a way that everybody can benefit from the material that's being taught and can actually go ahead to make something of themselves in the future. We begin to lose a lot of people along the way because we think that, okay, if I teach you math for 30 minutes a day, you've understood everything, you're good to go. So we really need to think about how we're going to phrase the cognitive process and how we're going to reshape it to make sure that our learners are actually benefiting from what we're teaching, not just, sitting in the classroom, we mark the register, we're like, yes, they came, we give them tests. Students are very good at cramming and passing tests. So that's a skill that we have developed in our systems. It's just how to pass the exams, which are doing very well. But we need to go beyond that and begin to actually think critically, begin to learn how to solve problems. Just look at our environment. We have so many things we need to solve, so many things that might not be working correctly at the moment. We need to be able to think about how are we going to solve that? How are we going to apply what we've learned in the classroom to solve that? If we're learning something in the classroom that cannot be applied to the problems we're seeing in the street when we leave the classroom, then there's a very big disconnect there. Second thing is the physical access. So the government has done really well when it comes to getting everybody into the classroom. However, now we have teachers who are overwhelmed. We have teachers who went from teaching maybe a class of 25, 30 people and now teaching a class of about 60 to 100 people. So the quality there starts to depreciate because people are now, you're all in the classroom, all right. We also have the double track system that's running, but you see the teachers are still as exhausted as they would be if they were managing a class with 100 people. If they're teaching the same class twice, it's quite tiring for them, and they need to be actually taken care of when it comes to that aspect. So having more teachers also brought onto the field is something that we should look into. Of course, it takes some time because teachers have to go for training and then they have to go for practice before they actually join the workforce. So it's not something we can solve today, and that's where technology would come into play. Technology would then be used to have people access that same teacher, but not in the same classroom or not at the same time. So you can access a teacher maybe from your home or from a library somewhere, and you're able to basically get the same content that the teacher is teaching. Those who are in the classroom, you're able to access it even when you're not in the classroom.
Fantastic. Let's come now to the sort of the gravamen of the argument today, because we're saying there are gaps in quality education and we believe technology can bridge those gaps. So I'm going to start with Abel. And Abel, we've identified 4 gaps: the physical gap, the cognitive gap, the emotional gap, and the social gap. Tell me how you think technology can begin to bridge these gaps. Abel.
I think one cannot overemphasize the role technology can play in bridging these gaps, especially in these times. And I hinted earlier to, when the COVID happened and children couldn't go to school, and the private schools were able to adapt quite quickly and provide learning via online to their kids and students, and we didn't have that same situation for the public schools. So technology is very, very important. What I have seen from worldwide experiences is that more and more government is partnering with private institutions to come up with digital tools that will help address problems. So problems like the supply and demand of teachers, right? So there are GPS apps somewhere in Sierra Leone through the Education Workforce Initiative, where they can now plot and find out based on the metrics to find out where there are more teachers, where they need less teachers, and also the distribution of subjects, teachers across, the whole geography. And that's a tool that we can implement. The good thing about this is that the blueprint is already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. All we need to do is to pick and choose and maybe do a bit of tweaking to our system. like that's for another example would be a company like Educate India. They're doing so well in trying to figure out how they can get more girls to enroll in schools, and they've created this very interesting app where parents, families, community leaders can track kids, girls, and help them, getting access into schools. So this is something that we can do. And as I said, it doesn't have to be just the government, right? There's supposed to be government-private partnership. And that is why, companies like Mastercard Foundation and etc. are doing really well, because when there's a partnership, then we can be able to sort of have a long-term approach, a sustainable approach to these things. The other is typical app, right, or a digital tool that needs to be initiated. I think it's very important, especially when it comes to content delivery, is trying to get the internet accessibility to the rural areas. It is really critical. And I like what Chalkboard is doing, because they, through their system, are able to provide content, and you don't necessarily need internet, but at some point you need internet to download the content, right? So you realize that companies, that telcos, they are zero rated the internet for education apps when it came to the COVID times, but most of them have gone back to norm. And people in the rural areas are not able to get access to these kinds of content being delivered by companies like Chalkboard Education. So it's very, very important that, yes, we develop tools, digital tools. And I'm saying we don't have to reinvent the wheels, because these tools are there, provided. All we have to do is to get, some synergy, get those who are doing it, government, work through policy, get implementation done, execution, and then we'll be getting the system oiled, right? The other thing I'd want to mention, and briefly, is that, yes, it's good we get private, support, but I've also sort of figured out that a lot of this support come in terms, right? So a Mastercard would maybe support a government for a project for 4 to 5 years, and the project may go well for this period. But after the 4 to 5 years, what happens? There's no sustainability plan that is being initiated. And I think that is really one of the gaps that government will have to address. What are the sustainability models and plans you have for your project? After you've gotten the support for a period of time, what are you going to do to make sure that there is continuity, even when it comes to digitalization and providing digital tools to bridge these gaps, physical, environmental, cognitive, and social? So it's really important that we get to address that.
Wow. I think that from the way you're talking, if I invited you for a whole show, you have a lot to say. Thank you for your passion for education. Evelyn, a few of us know you did a lot of quality work in the Western context. Now you're back in Ghana to help to straighten things. I suppose you had to make certain shifts to be able to work in this context and also work on this problem in Ghana. So apart from the opportunities for technology in bridging the gap, there will certainly be certain constraints which will require us to have certain shifts. So what I want you to do is talk to me a bit about some of the shifts required in our usage of technology to overcome these gaps. Because yes, technology is the answer, but if it has to work in our context, you have to do some adjustments, right? So please comment a bit about some of those shifts and how we can make sure that in bridging these gaps, we don't let these constraints overcome us.
Indeed. I think what we need to be very careful about is how we transfer what is happening out there to what is happening in Ghana, because our situations are quite different. And I think this is where we have to be a bit more creative about the way in which we disseminate and implement. So it's no good saying this is how it was done in the UK, therefore it must be done the same here. But also you have to be very careful about not reducing your expectations because you're in an environment that presents more, let's say, different challenges. So your ITC guy previously talked about thinking out of the box. I would like to change that saying to thinking like there is no box, because the box is situated. So if you're thinking out of the box, where is that box starting from before you actually start to think out of it? Think like there is no box at all. Now, if you look at the data, nearly 46% of the world's population do not have internet access. So although we have all these technology ideas, which can bring you very close, it can also widen the gap. So we have to be really careful about the way in which we actually use that technology. And also, you cannot wait for the change agents to come on board first. You have to force their hand. I'll use the example of the UK around 2000. I happened to be in a school that became a technology specialist school. And the way they did it is they literally rolled it out from one term to the other. And we were given laptops. Every classroom had a projector. You were told a certain percentage of your lessons had to go through the ICT route. All the administrative tasks that were happening in the school had to happen through ICT tools. And so in some way you were forced. You made mistakes. In fact, most of the time, I was in a secondary school. I'll call the children up and say, can you show me how to do this? Because they knew more than I did, right? And you learn because you have no choice but to learn. Then we have to add into this the cost of the equipment to actually run your ICT. So the PC costs, the tablets, the laptops, how competent are the people that are going to be using it? Are you going to train them? Then the maintenance capacity, as Abel said. So you need to have some kind of capacity building in your system so that you're able to sustain beyond the initial point. And so all of that becomes very, very challenging. And I would say in the UK, for example, no school pays for data. But in Ghana, data costs are ridiculously high. So how is the government going to be able to buy that data to make it easier for us to be able to access in schools? Never mind being a bit more inventive about the tools we use. Not a laptop, maybe Raspberry Pi. So you can do your coding and your basic stuff. Those are relatively cheap, just about between 200 and 400 Ghana cedi will get you a decent Raspberry Pi. And children are already accessing stuff. You can look at what is already happening elsewhere and how we can then use it here. Now, when Abel talked about the private schools being able to deliver, it was only 30% of private schools. 70% of private schools are low fee paying. They didn't have that capacity either. Why don't we marry, twin good private schools, which have all the tools, within their area, public schools that don't have those tools, and they kind of do some training, joint peer training, get the children to come in for certain experiences. They're getting those opportunities. And in some way, you're moving baby steps towards what you want. Use the content builders in the system. There's so much going on in the education field in Ghana. You have your e-campuses. You have a Class Dojo, which is an international one. You have Pearson Education in the system right now. They've got Active Learn, which has Abacus, Science Bag, all of those things that actually help the content. You don't need to go out there and look for it. Never mind what you find on the internet, which is actually going to help. Then I'm going to make a last very controversial point. We know part of the issue with education is the financing of education. It is all the money that comes into education tends to go to administration. It tends to go to teachers' payments, logistics, buildings, etc. Any country that has been very successful with making shifts in their education system don't have a boarding facility. It's all day schools, right? We have the free SHS, okay? I'm trying to stay on the right side of politics here. We have the free SHS, right? And beautiful tool is more feet in the classrooms and so on. However, if we were to say, let's mean test the parents that can pay for boarding facilities, so they pay, and divert that money into digital tools for the children to be able to access all this amazing stuff that is already out there. Coding is amazing. I mean, I'm part of Ghana STEM Network, and what happens in that space is beautiful. You know, there's senior code, people who are learning to code on YAM phones, on smartphones. I mean, these things already exist. So why don't we make use of that? Divert the money a bit. So free education is free tuition rather than the whole shebang. You know, you want to make sure that every child is able to access this. So direct some of the little money that you already have into what you want to happen, and let the parents also help you. After all, a lot of these children that's in HSS went through private education. That means their parents paid all the way from preschool all the way to JHS 3. So over 11 years of the education, they were paying fees. And then suddenly it's free. So the parents, some of those parents are capable of paying fees. You mean this, they pay that money, then it's used to do what we want to do. Otherwise, it will always be baby steps. Then lastly, like what Genevieve is saying, we have to have a way of delivering offline as well as online. Now, as well as what Genevieve does, we have Tech Aid in Ghana using the Asanka model.
Yes.
Where you download, you have all the materials, the resources and everything in one space. So it looks like they are digital, but actually it's offline content. Then we have the Rachel model, which is a worldwide one, which is remote area community hotspots for education, where the government actually gives the router to the organizations to be able to download data free, download what they need, and then do exactly what the Asanka model does. So as Abel said, it's already out there. We just have to collate it and make better use of it than we are currently. And too many times the constraints are financial. So we've got to think creatively about how we disseminate those financials. I have a lot more to say, Ben, but I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Evelyn. And talking about creative ways of solving the problem, I think, Genevieve, your platform is amazing and exemplary. Talk a bit about that, and also what the rest of the EdTech community can do in bridging these gaps, which have been so eloquently identified. Genevieve.
Right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Evelyn, and also Abel, for your nice marketing that you've done for us. I don't need to add so much onto it, but I'll just give a quick summary. So Chalkboard Education, we've been in existence since 2015. And the reason we came into existence is because we looked at the situation where many people are trying to go into university after high school, but they don't get the chance, either because they have no school fees, no access, the campus is full, or they have different social obligations where they're required to not go to school and to stay home and work with the family. So that's why Chalkboard Education came into play. We looked at how expensive data is in the country at the moment, and we decided that we'd have to make it offline if this is something that students who really hardly have any money, if it's something they're supposed to buy into, then it would need to be offline, because students are very, very sensitive when it comes to things like data costs and so on and so forth. Now I'll speak more about the role of the EdTech community. And I'll speak about it in 3 ways. So EdTech itself, right now, I think a lot of people are thinking about Zoom when they think of EdTech, but Zoom is not an EdTech platform. It is just a communication tool that seems to be making educational technology happen. But we have a lot of things that are happening in Ghana. As Evelyn went before me and said, we have Tech Aid, Abel mentioned eCampus. We have so many people who are doing so many great things. And we come from 3 different angles. So we have tools. So we have people who are creating tools. We have software engineers who are developing fabulous software that works perfectly for the Ghanaian system. Prior to this conversation, Ben had mentioned how people are looking for IBM and bigger names, but we have people creating these things locally, and they're doing very great jobs. We are here, we've studied the ground, we know the reality, we know what our students need, we know what our teachers need, we know their capabilities. And this actually helps, it goes a long way, because now teachers are more accepting of the technology, because they realize that, oh, okay, this is something that we developed together, like you piloted it with me and I understand how it works. I can talk to my fellow teachers about it so that they can also come on board and use it. So that's one of the ways that EdTech is coming. And then another way is that we bring in a lot of different expertise. As Abel had mentioned, content was such a demand. It was in such demand last year when COVID happened and everyone had to go offline, start teaching online. So when it comes to content, we have a lot of things to do. So we already have curricula that is out there, but the curricula is meant for face-to-face teaching. You need to be able to digitize it in a way that is acceptable on a digital platform. You can't just put everything that would be taught face-to-face onto a laptop or a phone, and then the students can actually go through it easily. It will be such a struggle. Even we struggle, like Evelyn mentioned, the 154-page document is too much. So imagine putting a 300-page book onto a platform and expecting people to keep scrolling. It's just something that would not be feasible for our students, young, even the old ones. So what we do here is we have instructional designers, and these are people who look at the content and they curate it and they make it easy to use and easy to understand on a mobile device. So they make it, they add images, they add audio files, they suggest use your video, and there's a lot of things that go into there. Into that. And then we also have the science of learning, which is basically how do people learn? And when you're pairing this with technology, you have to put some triggers into the applications so that people can keep learning. So you put, you make it competitive, or you make a sort of gamified system where people are able to progress from one level to another, and then they get I succeeded, yay, good job, congratulations. Such things keep people going and learning more, as opposed to you just keep scrolling, you're not getting feedback from the application, you're not getting any input on whether the technology is working or not. It needs to be more interactive, especially when it comes to our younger learners who need to be prompted along the way. So those are the ways that EdTech is helping when it comes to instructional design. And then thirdly, EdTech really comes into, this is something that we really need on the continent. This is where EdTech is actually coming to change a lot of how we do our teaching, in that we provide data. So we have a lot of data-driven decisions. We look at data, we look at how people are learning, what they're learning, what time they're learning. Our software goes as far as tracking where they're learning. And you're able to tell that, okay, we have a lot of people learning from this particular area, or we have a lot of people who are focusing more on this subject than another subject, or they're struggling. Like you can see, maybe they took 10 hours to learn one page, and you realize that, okay, this particular page might not have been taught well. We need to revise that conversation and present it in a better way so the students can learn better. We also look at the data in terms of, not just numbers of, we have 1,000 students in the classroom. We look at, the age of the students, the gender of the students, different learning patterns also, because we have people who are more mathematical, people who are more creative, people who are more analytical. We have different kinds of learners. So you're able to access that data. You know what kind of students you have in the classroom. You're not just talking to one audience and delivering the same message. There's different ways to curate the content and make sure it's feasible and practical for all the learners in the classroom. So this is a ways that the EdTech community is coming into play when it comes to education technology here in Ghana. When it comes to some of the constraints that we're facing, Evelyn had touched on this, and I'll go back to it, but it goes back to the money. money. So we need, and money even from 2 points of, two sides of the table. So we have money on the sides of the users and the parents. So the students, the parents, the teachers, the school administration, they need funding for their projects. They need funding for the software. They need funding for their tools and their devices that they're using. I was actually having a conversation with a friend yesterday prior to this call, and I was saying how it would be amazing if the old boys would now, and old girl networks would start incorporating some of the funding goes into EdTech solutions. So, okay, let's buy computers, or let's pay for data for the schools, so the schools don't have to worry about these things. It became a breathing contest. So I don't know how early that conversation is. It might be too early to have that conversation in the old boys, old girls networks, but I think that is a good way to go when it comes to solving the costs for the parents and for the teachers. And then another thing about the costs is for us as an organization. So we roll out projects, and we have, what we think is good impact. We have over 10,000 teachers or people who we've been able to train on our platform, which is our bragging points. But then 10,000 in a population of 30 million, we're still so far. So some of the things that hinder us from performing is like sustainability. So we want to do a project that we can sustain and run it the full course. We don't want to start a project where we're rolling out to 10 million people and then we cannot continue. So when we have public-private partnerships coming into play, we have people who are providing devices for the schools. We have people who are, waiving the data costs for the schools, or actually paying the data costs for the different schools. When we have people who are funding the projects and making sure teachers in different communities are able to access e-learning training, because this is another thing that came up last year during the pandemic. Teachers were told to go and teach online, but they had not received teaching or training for how to teach online. So we're used to face-to-face Blackboard, and now you're saying, okay, use computer, teach, analyze, grade. And so there's a lot. This is a long conversation. I'm not sure we can finish.
Thank you for those insights. Let me just announce this is the EdTech Mondays brought to you by the Mastercard Foundation. And EdTech Monday is one of the initiatives of the Foundation's Regional Center for Teaching and Learning in ICT. Our aim is to leverage technology to advance teaching and learning. Today, my guests are Genevieve Simuyu, Country Manager for Chalkboard Education. She just spoke about what they do. Ebela Kwe, Executive Director of Africa Schools Online, and Evelyn Ajepong. I call her a returnee. She's a returnee.
Indeed.
And a Chief Inquiry Officer at Steambox Studios. Now, we have a few comments. I'm going to turn to Kokui, my colleague here, to read a few. Then I'll take final comments, 1 minute each from my panelists. So, Kokui, what do we have so far by way of comments coming in?
Yeah, a few people enjoying the conversation and sending in their thoughts. So Samuel Baden says, good morning, Bernard. Quality education should be evident in the relevance of our workforce in addressing the human resource needs of the country.
All right.
Indeed, in our bid to expand access to education, it often leads to deterioration in quality. The other side of the coin is also true, that when we pay much attention to quality, we often ignore access. Undoubtedly, quality and access are intricately connected. We should be looking at access to what and quality for whom. Now, Omega Francis says, great insight. He's enjoying the conversation. Stefan Opata says, public-private partnership is the way to go. He also says, Bernard, like Abel said, there are blueprints. How do we implement them? And Joseph Alonso says, Bernard, there are some areas who have bad network connections, so learning online is difficult. What can we do about this, please? Now on Twitter, G. Omzi says, internet is very expensive and slow in Ghana, and it's very difficult for students and educators to take advantage of massive open education content.
So it's very clear that listeners and viewers are in sync with what guest panelists have been saying. I want to give each of you a minute to just give me like one final bullet point of what we should not forget about using technology to bridge the gap in access to education. I'm going to start with Abel. Give me your final bullet point, then I'll come to Genevieve and I'll end with Evelyn. So Abel, please go ahead.
All right, so I would like to wrap up with this. I think there's some very good things happening in the space. And I personally, I'm a fan of the current Minister of Education. And I think he has the good interest of the people of the country at heart. But I feel that a lot of the execution, the detail really is in the execution of the projects. Because yes, free education is good, but why do we have to take care of boredom, as Evelyn said, right? Yes, new curriculum is good, perfect. But why do you come up with a new curriculum and 2 years down the line, there are still no textbooks, right? So there are real projects, real good policies, but we have to look at the implementation and the execution. And I would like to answer one of the questions that came by your comments. I'm saying that I feel that Genevieve was right. Maybe if we're not going to allow the parents to contribute anyway because it's free education, they could have a directive that all PTAs, all girls, all alumni should build tech labs, right? Provide computers and tablets to the schools so that they can be able to get access and benefit from the digitization, which we cannot do without. So that would be my final comments.
Thank you. Let me come to Genevieve. What's your final comment?
All right, thanks, Ben. Two things. So I'd like to say that the quality of education cannot depend solely on technology. We have to work in partnership with teachers, parents, ministries, governments. All of us need to be in sync when it comes to trying to solve the problems that we have when we see education, when we see challenges in the quality of education. It's not something that will be done just by the EdTech community in our little silo. We need everybody to be brought on board. This is something that affects our entire nation as a whole. And secondly, I'd like to agree with Abel and Evelyn and say that, yes, we need to do a lot of work when it comes to the policies. We have amazing policies in Ghana. We know this is an open secret. However, we're not applying them to the fruition. We're not applying them to the max of the maximum capacity that we should be. So we need to be able to apply these things because other countries are coming, looking at the documents and running off with them, which is, I think, the most annoying part. But we need to start focusing on how we're going to follow these policies. Everybody look for that 154-page document, read it, see what you can do to help us achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. And Evelyn, you have the final word.
Okay, so for me, one of my niches in my consultancy is the fact that I do teacher training. And I've been doing it through neogenics education and then independently and then through schools, etc. And one of the biggest things, I know, Ben, you asked me, what have I found coming back? Was my jolt. What scared me the most was that our change agents, the teachers, were not knowledgeable about any of what was happening. And so the policy has been built beautifully at the top. The children are ready, because children are always ready. They change so much faster than we adults do. And then the middle bit, which is going to actually make things happen, they don't know what is going on. They don't understand what is going on. They are not skilled up. Many teachers don't read about education research. Many teachers don't even know where to find the information about education research. They do their teacher training, many of them through distance learning. So they are not doing it on the classroom, no action research going on, not really able to apply. So you can have a teacher come to you, they've got a first class degree in education, and you ask them a very simple question and you realize there's a gap. So they know the knowledge part, which Genevieve said earlier. They're very able, they know all the information that they need to, to say the right things to get the good grades, but they don't necessarily know how to apply. How do my children learn? Are they visual? Are they auditory? Are they kinesthetic? What must I do to make sure that my children are able to learn better? Am I allowing them to teach each other? So the pedagogy in the classroom, are we getting that right? You have to force their hand in some way. You have to say, you must use your digital tools in such a way and actually create that avenue for them to be able to do that in order for that to happen. As for getting alumni and so on to help, before I went to the UK, I was in Achimota. Achimota School had a 1-year group build, a lovely lab, and now the lab is not functioning as well because maintenance becomes an issue. And at the tertiary level in Ghana, there is an ICT levy that most students have to pay. So apparently at tertiary level in Ghana, ICT use and delivery is brilliant. It's running at something like 70%. But at secondary and primary, it's not happening. The reason is mostly financial. If you're paying a levy that goes to your ICT, your network manager looking after things when they go wrong, rather than leaving them too long, not updating all of that stuff, that creates a massive gap. So really, in order for us to make use of them whole scale as we would like to, there has to be so many features, as Jenny says, that comes into the equation. And for me, as an ex-teacher, I still teach. It is the teachers that we need to get right. Get it at the understanding, the use, the willingness, the awesomeness. We need to get that right first.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Thank you, Evelyn Ajipong, from Steambox, GH Ibelakwe, from Africa Schools Online, Genevieve Simuyu, from Chalkboard Education. These have been our guests discussing using technology to fill the gaps in quality education as part of our EdTech Monday conversations brought to us by the Mastercard Foundation. My name is Bernard Avile. I did this segment with Kokwi. Thank you very much for being on. Take a short break before we